This episode of Test Drive is made possible by RateMyEV.com. Hello viewers, you join me inside the vehicle for the start of this video, which is not exactly how I'd had planned things. I was hoping to be outside, but it's raining today. I don't want to get my equipment wet, and I don't want to be wet either, as I still have quite a ways to go on my road trip, which brings us exactly into this video, because I am in the middle of a road trip, the drive home portion actually right now, from a trip from my hometown of St. Thomas, Ontario to Montreal, Quebec. Now, Ford invited me out to check out the 2025 Ford Maverick, and I figured it would be a great opportunity to see how the Ford F-150 Lightning would fare on a road trip. We've done a number of different vehicles over the years, and I figured this would be a good chance to see how a pickup truck electric would do, because the range isn't really ideal for this type of road trip, and we actually just finished talking about how a Ford F-150 Lightning is a great vehicle if you're doing a lot of stuff in town, but I wanted to put it through its paces. Now, if you watched the video that we did on the Platinum, I said I was going to be taking that truck to Montreal. However, I had to return the vehicle and swap it for this. This is a Flash, so not quite as flashy as the Platinum, but still pretty capable and with pretty much the same range despite having 10 kilowatt hours less of overall battery capacity. This is about 121 kilowatt hours versus the 131 on my Platinum, but the range is still estimated for about 483 kilometers. So my original plan was to leave St. Thomas, stop 2 times on my way, charging up the vehicle, and then getting to Montreal and have, enough charge left to tool around if I needed to. But because I had to swap the cars, that was on the way. So it kind of screwed up my plans a little bit. However, it worked out. On my drive up on Monday, I was able to get from my home to Mississauga with no problem. Obviously, it was a full charge. It's only about 175 kilometers. And then I swapped the trucks. So this Flash was fully charged, which allowed me to get to my second charge destination, which was just outside of Prescott, Ontario. And it was a little iffy. I'll give you that. We were starting to average, at the beginning of the trip, it was about 30 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, but it started to get cooler, right? I left my house, it was like 14 degrees Celsius, and then it started to go down and down and down to about 8 degrees Celsius, which means that the battery needed to stay warmer, which means it needed to use more power. Now, for the most part during my drive, because the temperature was actually pretty good for me, I didn't even have the HVAC systems on. But something that we've talked about recently when it comes to modern electric vehicles is the HVAC system doesn't really matter anymore. It takes up so little amount of energy to keep the cabins of these vehicles cold or warm that having them on or off doesn't make a gigantic dent in the range like it used to with first or second generation electric vehicles. So it wasn't really a big deal, but I had the HVAC off. One of the windows was open and cracked just so I could have a little bit of fresh air, but for the most part, super comfortable. I was starting to get a little bit low on range. By the time I got to Prescott, I had about 50 kilometers of range left, averaging closer to 38 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. But I was able to charge it up, found a charging station there at McEwen. Not the greatest in terms of cost to overall charge. I put in 71.4 kilowatt hours of electricity, and it cost me $50, almost $50 exactly. That's pretty high. I mean, if I were to charge this thing at home and put 71 kilowatts, it would have cost me $4, $5, something like that. But that is the price you pay for going on a road trip. Now, our meet point for the Ford event was at the Marriott Montreal Airport Hotel. So they didn't have a car charger there, but the valet told me that they would go and charge the car for me. And it actually worked out well enough. They took the truck, plugged it in, and it did take, roughly 18, 20 hours to charge it up because it was $1 per hour to charge it. It was charging at like 6 kilowatts, which not the greatest, but still it was going to be there for a couple days. So the charge at the hotel only cost me $20 to put 118 kilowatt hours of electricity into the truck. It means this thing was pretty much empty, right? If it's 121, I mean, obviously that's not completely accurate, but still, it cost me $20, $20.86 to be exact. And that worked out a whole lot better. So the vehicle was charged up in about 20 hours after dropping it off, which was great because I didn't need it for another day and a bit. So when I picked it up this morning at 7 o'clock, it was fully charged, no problem, hit the road. This is my first real stop, first place that I'm charging it up. We're just outside of Kingston, as I mentioned, currently at 61% charge. I forget exactly how much I had when I got to here, but it wasn't too bad. And according to my app, it says it's only cost me about $8.90 to put in 37 kilowatt hours already. So if we use that simple math to get us up to the 74, whatever I had on our first stop, it should only cost me about $20, less than that. So you got to check. Now, this is a charge point, and I'm pretty sure the one at the McEwen was as well. But obviously, every single person, any individual business or whatever who has a public charger that you can use will charge whatever they want. That one I think was about 60 cents per kilowatt hour, whereas again at home it costs me about 6 cents, 7 cents per kilowatt hour. So big difference there. You're obviously paying for the convenience to be able to charge up your truck quicker. But the idea is I'm doing about 720 kilometers both directions in order to go to Montreal and then to come home. So we're certainly not halfway through our voyage now. I've only done about 275 kilometers right now. The idea is to go another approximately 275 kilometers or so, a little bit less than that. I think it's like 250. I'll be charging up in Mississauga, Ontario, where this truck was picked up from, and then doing a smaller fast charge from there in order to get home, in order to make sure that I make it, just to be sure, right? The idea is I want to get home, and then it'll cost me next to nothing to get there. So next step, I'm going to take this on the road. We'll talk a little bit about how it is on the highway, and then we'll wrap up afterwards with the final total numbers and everything about the road trip. So let's hit the road. All right, so we finished charging here in Kingston. It cost me $17 to get about 65 kilowatt hours. We're at 81%. It did start to throttle me at 80% though. I was charging at about 117 kilowatts and then it went down to 55. Now I'm trying to think back to the fast charge I did before. Maybe I didn't even go up to 80% because I was pretty low. So maybe I stopped off around 75. But anyway, that's, typical with electric vehicles. They're not going to really charge past that. Some of them do, some of them don't. But anyway, we're back on the road now. It has now cost me, $90? $85 total for electricity. And again, I always bring up, how much would that have cost had I taken a gas pickup truck, right? Gas isn't cheap, especially in Montreal. I would have had to fill it up there for sure. It was like $1.56 or something per liter. At least back in St. Thomas, last time I checked, before I left, it was like $1.20 something. So anyway, point is, so far it has been pretty fine. And you know what? I needed to stop anyway. I needed to use the washroom. I needed to pick up a bottle of water. I wanted to get some drinks, my energy drink, just in case I start to feel a little tired as I'm driving along. It's good to have something, a little pick-me-up should you need it. But anyway, the point is, back on the road now. And it hasn't cost me too much. Now let's talk a little bit about the F-150 Flash, because I've been saying now for 2 full episodes on the F-150 Lightning that the Flash was the trim that makes the most sense. And I still do believe that based on, in-town stuff, if you're doing a lot of things, that normal truck people are doing, which is staying within your sphere, about 150 kilometers, 200 kilometers or so. It's great because, you're getting all the features that you need, right? Heated seats up front, heated steering wheel, dual zone climate control. I mentioned in the last video, there's no driver only mode. There technically is a button, but the airflow still comes out of the other vents. So that's why I say it's not really there. But one of the big features is BlueCruise, the hands-free semi-autonomous driving function that you can use on the highway. Now, driving up to Montreal, I used it the entire time, and I had very few times where it kicked off. Was really just because of construction. Outside of that, it worked very well. Now you have to do the lane changing yourself. You just click the turn signal and it'll move you over, and it worked very well. Now today, not as much use as I was hoping for. It's been raining the entire time. There's been a lot more construction on this side of the 401, which means there are less opportunities for it to work. So for the most part, it has been, I'd say it's almost been like 50% of the time it's been active, which isn't great, but what can you do, right? Some of the things are out of my control, and it's better to be safe. So obviously weather conditions aren't going to permit it to work as well as it should. Some of the sensors are covered up, even with the wipers going. The camera can't really see as well. So I'm not surprised that it isn't functioning all the time, but it has worked out well enough. And when it does work, it has been nice. So it helps to take some of that stress out of driving. takes control, makes sure that you're in the middle of the lane, you're doing the right speed and all that, and it's been fine. So I have no complaints about that. And, one of the things that we talk about all the time when we're talking about electric vehicles is to find out more about them if you really are in the market for a vehicle like this, because, there's only so much that we can do in the limited time that we've got. Owners are the ones that really have the best access to find out how these vehicles are long term, which is why our sponsor, RateMyEV.com, exists. It's a database of ownership reviews on all sorts of electric vehicles to tell you how they are to live with on a daily basis, whether or not the owners who bought them regret their purchases, any problems that they've had, or better yet, the things that they love about their electric vehicles. Reviews don't always have to be negative. People don't have to go on the internet just to say bad things. You can go on the internet, believe it or not, and say good things about stuff. And that's what RateMyEV.com is for. So if you are in the market for an electric vehicle, whether it's something like this Ford F-150 Lightning or any of the other electric vehicles available here in North America, RateMyEV.com is the place to find out more. Find out from the owners who have bought them, who've put their money down, to see how they have been over the course of their ownership history. So thanks to them for sponsoring our road trip and their continued support here on Test Drive. Now we're back on the 401. Look at that hands-free mode. It's going. I'm going to slow down a little bit though. I'll admit, we talked about, so there we go. See, it's kicked off already because the rain is too intense, I suppose, so I've got to now put my hands back on the wheels. But back to what I was saying about range, 339 kilometers as of right now. I need to go about 272. I checked my notes after hitting the stop button on our previous section. It's going to be tight. Now, it's not to say I can only stop in Mississauga. There are other places that I can pull over. The Ford F-150 here has a charging app, a public charging app, which will show me in real time whether or not the different stations that are coming up are available, if they're in use, if they're not functioning, and if they work with my truck. Now, I do not have a NACS adapter on this vehicle, so I must stick with CCS, and that's fine because I find that the network is much better. And that's really been the whole point of driving this vehicle to Montreal, is to show that it is possible to do it with not as much planning as you might think. I spent maybe 10 minutes the weekend before planning this trip to check the Flow app to see where I was going to stop. I looked specifically for chargers that had a faster than 100 kilowatt charge, because 50 is kind of the norm here on Ontario. It's way too slow. We shouldn't be installing 50 kilowatt chargers anymore. It's barely even fast, okay? 100 is the bare minimum I will look for. The one that we just used, the charge point, was rated for about 160 or 180, and then the McEwen one that I used on the way up was rated for up to 200. Now, the F-150 obviously isn't pulling that, even with the battery saying it's at the temperature it needs to be in order to have fast charging capabilities. It's still only pulling about 115. Even on Monday, it was about 110 kilowatts that it was pulling off the charger. So, there's like the maximum you could do with the truck, which would be nice if they really did improve the charging speeds. But the point is, I wasn't there for very long. 30 minutes from the time I parked and plugged in the truck to the time that I left. And I used some of that time to, as I mentioned, use the washroom, get some snacks, pay for it, go back to the truck, film this, get on my phone and catch up on emails and whatnot. So it wasn't really wasted time. But now that I'm back on the road, I have to be careful because we're 264 kilometers away. I have 334 kilometers of range. If everything stayed exactly the way that it was, I would make it with a bit of a margin. However, I'm not expecting it to, right? If you were able to see on my trip computer before, it was at 42 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers just coming out of town. We're now down to 38 kilowatt hours. We've only driven 8 kilometers, but it's probably going to be closer to that. It's 8 degrees here right now in the Kingston area, which means that the battery needs to be warmed up. So I'm wasting electricity in order to keep the battery at the temperature it needs to be in order to drive. So I've lost range, and that's typical. I mean, you can't really control the weather, so you're stuck with whatever you get, and it's been fine. So obviously my plan is to monitor things. And that's just life with an electric vehicle. It's not something that I stress about. I just keep an eye on the range, and I work with that buffer. So right now, as I mentioned, we have a 70 kilometer buffer, If that stays the way that it is, then I'll be fine. But I noticed on the drive up that it was, progressively getting smaller. It's a percentage of my total range, and that percentage was kind of staying the same. So, if I had 500 kilometers range and I had a 50 kilometer surplus, that means it was 10%. It kind of stayed that way, right? So if I had 300 kilometers of range, I only had 30 kilometers of a surplus. So we'll keep an eye on it. Now, there's one thing I want to note. I just want to tell you right now that I have found super annoying. Ford, please fix this. Okay, I'm driving with BlueCruise, but it's not available right now. I have to keep my hands on the wheel. So we're effectively in adaptive cruise mode. Now look, if I go use my turn signal, it flashes at once. Because, when you're in BlueCruise mode and you've got the lane turn, the lane change system on, all you have to do is tap the turn signal and it'll keep it on until it's made its lane change. But when the system's not engaged fully and you have to be driving, it doesn't switch the turn signals back over. Now, I know it's a small problem. I know it's a first world problem, but I am the type of person that will click the turn signal and make my lane change because I know there's going to be 3 flashes coming out of the back. I keep forgetting to do it when I'm in this mode to hold it down until I've made my lane change, because if not, the people behind me just see 1 flash and I've moved over. I look like a jerk. So Ford, just fix that, right? The computer knows that I am now in control. I have to have my hands on the wheel. Remove the 1 flash, right? Take it back to the way it's supposed to work, because it really is annoying, and it could be in situations dangerous. You're flashing once and then you're cutting over you. So, I don't understand why it disables that when it's not fully activated. Somebody please explain it to me. So what we'll do is we'll cut it now. I will give you a sit rep once we're back home. It's not going to be today. I'm going to be getting home late afternoon. I'm going to want to go to bed, but we will talk about how the overall, last 500 kilometers of driving went with the F-150 Lightning Flash, and if it really is a vehicle you could road trip here in Ontario. All right, so as promised, we have wrapped up our road trip, 1,420 kilometers roughly of driving in this vehicle to and from my home to Montreal. And I think it worked out pretty well. Now, we had a little bit of I wouldn't say a hiccup, but I was supposed to take the Platinum all the way from home to where we were in Montreal. As I mentioned, I had to swap the vehicle, so I didn't charge it 1 time, but it still worked out pretty well. So picking up this vehicle from Mississauga, driving it to Prescott, Ontario, which was like 350 kilometers, something like that. It was the most expensive charge. It cost me $50 to get like 61 kilowatt hours, roughly, maybe a little bit more than that, of charge. Not very good, pretty expensive. That was at a McEwen gas station just inside of Prescott. Now from there, I took the truck from Prescott to Montreal. We went to the Marriott at the Montreal airport. I was able to charge the vehicle there. Luckily, the valet said that they'd be able to plug it in. They'd send me a picture of the charging station, and then I activated it through my app. So it took quite a while. It took 20 hours to charge this because it was charging at like 5 kilowatts per hour. Not great. But after about 20 hours, it was fully charged up. 100%. Cost me $20. Pretty reasonable for the charge. Since I wasn't using the truck for a full day, I didn't mind having it out of commission. Now, my drive home on Thursday, the 22nd of May, started off again with a full charge, drove all the way to just outside of Kingston, the west side of Kingston. So again, about 275 kilometers, which is actually where you picked me up at the beginning of this video. And that cost me the least amount. That was one of the best charging stations. I used $17. And I believe I charged up like 71 kilowatt hours of electricity. So cost per kilowatt was phenomenal there. So big shout out to the Petro-Canada that we were using a charge point charger. Wow. Now, one of the things you got to keep in mind when you're charging your vehicle is to see what the cost is, whether it's a per minute or per hour charge, or whether it's per kilowatt hour. Most of these were charging per kilowatt hour. So it doesn't matter how fast you're charging, you're paying for the amount of electricity that you're using. So that Petro-Canada was the most affordable, and it really was the quickest. I was getting like 120 kilowatt charging capabilities. So very good from that, no complaints whatsoever. I then went from Kingston to Mississauga, Ontario. There's a charger I like to use at the Shell station just off Mavis Road in Mississauga. Usually it's pretty good. I was the only person there. I was only getting about 69 kilowatts of charge, 69 kilowatt per hour. Not very good. It was pretty bad. That one ended up costing me about $32 to do, again, about 45 kilowatt hours of charge. Not great. And I was there for a while because it was the slowest that I had. Usually I'm getting over 100. So I'm not quite sure what was going on there. So not great. Came home, still had like 20% of a charge left. Plugged it into my level 2 charger at home. That took overnight. That cost me $8.50 to get it charged up. So all in all, what are we looking at? 50, 17, 32. We're looking at roughly 110, I'd say, quick maths. So not too bad overall, a little bit more than I was expecting to pay. However, if you were to compare that to driving an F-150, 1,400 kilometers, if you averaged, say, 10 liters per 100 kilometers to keep it safe, have the numbers pretty average, you'd be spending 140 liters of fuel. That's more than a full gas tank. And at even the cheapest here in St. Thomas, $1.20 per liter means you would have spent a lot more in gas. Maybe not a lot more, but more. Now, Montreal, gas prices there are like $1.70. So filling up in Montreal would have been costly. Obviously, I would have tried to prefer to keep it as low as possible, try to find the lowest charging or lowest fueling stations. So once again, I think this proves that any sort of electric vehicle you plan on taking on a road trip is doable. This at about 483 kilometers is not the most amount of range you can get out of an EV. And this is also not the most ideal EV when it comes to doing a road trip. As I mentioned on the video on this specific vehicle, as well as the one on the Platinum, I say that this is more of an in-town vehicle, something you're buying because you're doing a lot of in-city commuting. You're not going on road trips. But if you gotta, you can. There's really no issues with it. I had no stress whatsoever. I knew where the charging stations were that were the most ideal for my drive. Have I really checked to see the price per kilowatt and really looked for the cheapest alternatives? I might have had to stop one or two extra times throughout the drive. Might have had to change my plans a little bit, but for the most part, it still worked out because even on an 8 or 9 hour drive, I got to stop to eat. I got to stop to use the facilities. So you're going to be stopping no matter what. Might as well stop, charge up the truck, get some snacks and continue on. So really, it worked out great. I'm glad I had the opportunity to do an F-150 Lightning. We featured a number of different vehicles on road trips now. Every single time they have worked out great. So if you're interested to see some of the other ones that we've done, we've taken vehicles like the Cadillac Lyriq and the BMW i7 on comprehensive road trips, showing you how it is easily doable in an electric vehicle. So check those videos out. They will be linked at the end of this video. We appreciate all the support that you give us here. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider thumbs up on it. Give us a subscribe if you haven't done so already. And if you have any questions, whether it's about this F-150 Lightning Flash or the road trip that I did, leave us a comment below. I will get back to you personally. Thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.